Members' motion with no legislative effect. Dr. Wendy Hong will move a motion on making good use of the Future Fund and the Hong Kong Growth Portfolio to promote the diversification of industry structure. 8 members will move amendments to the motion. This council will proceed to a joint debate on the motion and the amendments later. I will first call upon Dr. Wendy Hong to speak and move the motion. Then I will call upon Mr. Michael Luk, Dr. Kennedy Wong, Mr. Frankie YICK, Dr. Johnny Ng, Dr. Stephen Wong, Mr. Paul Chair, Dr. Tan Yueheng, and Mr. Sunny Tan to speak in sequence, but they may not move the amendments at this stage. The joint debate now begins. Members who wish to speak, please press the request to speak button. And now call upon Dr. Wendy Hong to speak and move the motion. President, I move that the motion as printed on the agenda be passed. That is, making good use of the Future Fund and the Hong Kong Growth Portfolio to promote the diversification of industry structure. We are at the crossroads of history and globalization has changed the global chains, and the Russia-Ukraine war has brought about global challenges, and climate change presents unprecedented challenges, while COVID-19 have led to wholesale changes in the global markets. The question to us is whether Hong Kong has the vision to deal with such drastic changes, and do we have the tools in place to realize such strategies. Hong Kong is a global financial center, but our industries are too monotonous, and they are deteriorating, and our conflicts are deepening. And our young people have limited prospects. Even our financial industry is running on empty. So the question to us is how we can reverse this trend, and how can we institute changes to our economy and tackle deep-seated issues. These are highly complex issues that must be tackled by the entire society. But we are now seeing a clear consensus that if the government continues to embrace a non-intervention policy and allow the industries to tackle the problems for themselves, we can never resolve the structural challenges facing Hong Kong. The government should be proactive in playing the role of facilitator and promoter in tackling our deep-seated issues. But as a prime example of a free economy, the government has no prior experience in getting involved in the economy. So where would the change begin? I think as a starting point, we can create tools to allow the government to take part in the development of the industries, and they should intervene as appropriate. In 2016, the $22 billion Future Fund was established, and in 2020, the $22 billion Hong Kong portfolio with a Hong Kong nexus was set up to reinforce Hong Kong's status as a financial, commercial, and I&T center. More than $10 billion was allocated to make investments in the development of I&T and the Greater Bay Area. However, these efforts are still not enough. These two funds lack a strategic focus. We should establish a higher vision by considering the global economic development so that we can supplant new economic growth drivers and create opportunities going forward. The funds are operated in a conventional manner, and the fund is vested or placed with the exchange fund. It is invested by the Hong Kong Monetary Authority and subject to the existing EF's investment management regime. And the focus is to safeguard investment returns, so it's relatively conservative. So it's hard to come up with anything visionary to drive the growth of our industries. Even though the return of the Future Fund exceeds that of the Exchange Fund, the other goals are yet to be achieved. Together with heightened risks and the strategy to go away from the US dollar. I think this is something we must consider going forward. The government's goal is yet to be achieved, and the Hong Kong growth portfolio was a breakthrough in itself, but the government was not involved in the scrutiny of such decisions, and the HKMA would select general partners who would make the investments, and eventually the management is conducted by the HKMA. Even though the growth portfolio is more aggressive than the future fund. But if we expect these GPs to adopt a more strategic approach and to create new opportunities for young people, I think such expectations are not realistic, and these GPs are held accountable to their own investors, and their focus would be on investment returns. It's hard to use to gauge their work with these public objectives. Apart from the appointment of a couple of GPs, nothing was done under the growth portfolio. So a lot could have changed in 2 years, and if this continues, we will fall behind sooner than later. The government should make proper use of the Future Fund and Hong Kong growth portfolio to create new opportunities for Hong Kong. The Hong Kong Growth Portfolio Management Committee has 6 ex-official members. I met 5 of them recently, and we had a discussion with multiple experts, and we came up with 4 conclusions. First, the government should request the investing GPs to not just focus on investment returns. Instead, they should look at the long-term development of our industries as one of the goals of investment, and the governance committee and management committee should establish clear objectives for GPs to follow, so that they must invest from a strategic perspective and focus on strategic emerging industries and new industries. The Hong Kong growth portfolio did not offer concrete recommendations on investments with a Hong Kong nexus. If it simply translates to listed companies coming to Hong Kong, we cannot achieve new growth. I recommend coming up with solid definitions for investments with a Hong Kong nexus. We should, that way, our employment could benefit. In terms of the investment, the government should play a more direct and proactive role. We should learn from success cases around the world, including the Temasek Holdings, wholly owned by the Singaporean government, the Shenzhen Capital Group Company Limited, co-founded with joint funding from the Shenzhen municipal government and the market, and setting up an investment institution with direct involvement of the SAR government. So these are strategic investment funds and or venture funds, and such venture funds can operate in parallel with the GPs. For the Hong Kong venture funds, sub-funds could be set up, and on the long run, we can foster industries in different areas together with universities, Science Park, Hong Kong PC, Cyberport, etc. We can create a holistic chain for Hong Kong's enterprises. That way we can diversify our industries while appealing to companies overseas, and in case that can create new drivers. We should set up a blueprint for our industries and pave the way forward for future development. Hong Kong's venture funds could become a strategic tool. We need a strategic and visionary positioning to guide our investments. So the setting up of Hong Kong-based venture funds should dovetail with other areas of work. I urge the incoming government to embrace a new mentality by playing the roles of promoter, implementer, and make proper use of the Hong Kong growth portfolio to create a new chapter for Hong Kong.
The question is that we should that Dr. Wendy Hong's motion be passed. Honorable Chung-hung, we have got the $220 billion future fund, and we have got an injection of capital into the Hong Kong growth portfolio. How is the government going to use the money to have an improvement in our livelihood by the FS? This is close to our hearts. I welcome Dr. Hong's motion, and I hope that everybody will learn more about better ways to make good use of the money, and then we can eradicate poverty as well as the poverty gap, so that we won't have a rich government with poor people. For the FTU in particular, for my work office, I've always received requests for help. Sometimes someone is semi-retired or fully retired with a savings of $1 million. Well, they are attracted to mainland properties. It won't sort of ask for a high price, and then there is a guarantee for renting the property on behalf of the property owner and promising a regular income, saying that the rate of return will be 6% or more. So people would be very attracted to such a small-scale investment, which would promise a regular rental income. Many people were attracted for the first few months. Yes, they do get rental income, but then the developer will abscond, and then they lose everything. They become very regretful. Well, what does this illustrate, and how is it related to the motion before us? In Hong Kong, we have got people with a decent level of income, or they have got a small amount of savings. But then there are few investment options. For the stock market, we have got fluctuations in the markets. Prices fluctuate so much that you count yourself blessed if you don't lose anything. For the I-bond, the interest rate isn't that attractive, and then you can only subscribe a small amount of money. And then the best way to invest is to buy a property, and then you get a rental return, and you hope that the price, the value will increase. But then the threshold is getting more and more difficult, and then with an increase in land supply, it appears to me that property prices won't be soaring anymore. So you want to think of other ways of investment. It's very difficult. You don't know how to invest in technology startups. And then for venture capital, again, it will easily ask for $1 million, and the risk is high. So it isn't for any layman or retail investors. Therefore, many people would be attracted to the idea of buying a mainland property, and then you suffer losses because you are not in the same market. In my amendment, I am saying that there should be more channels for investment, so that residents can also ride on the opportunities of the Future Fund. But then for our, we have trust in the judgment of the financial officials. Usually they have got a rate of return of 15.3%, and in fact it accounts for 60% of the future fund, and therefore they have got a very good rate of return, that is 12.3%. It's really attractive. Many people would like to ride on the bandwagon of the future fund, hoping that they can get a steady and regular return. Maybe we should learn from the experience of Singapore, so that residents can take part in their investment while avoiding investment risk in other forms. In May this year, for the Temasek holdings, they have got Celia under the holdings, and they have got a private equity fund covering non-essential consumption items and healthcare products, tailoring for a post-pandemic life. Well, I think we should change our thinking so that the general public can also invest in innovative projects. We should also be given channels to invest in the GBA, and then we can expand our real economy, get quality jobs, and enhance our productivity. For startups, they really need investment. And in future, by creating such a channel, we can spread the investment risk of the residents, and they can share the benefits of innovation and technology. I hope members will support my amendment as well as Dr. Hung's original motion. Thank you. Dr. Kennedy Wong. Mr. President, well, when you look at the focus of the world economy and when you look at the geopolitical tension, I think for Hong Kong to be integrated into the overall national development policy will be the way forward. We have the 14th five-year plan. We've got the outline development plan for the GBA. And I think we should work towards the development of the 8 centers. And in fact, the most important task is to turn Hong Kong into an international hub for innovation and technology. For the DAB, I think it is tantamount for us to come up with a policy to have new and advanced technology industries. For the Future Fund as well as the Hong Kong Growth Portfolio, I think it's time for us to promote a diversion of our economic structure. I've been emphasizing that for new and advanced technology industries, we have got many different forms of industries. How are we going to have it sort of applied and commercialized, and which industries would suit us best so that we can develop them up to a certain scale? And then there are shortfalls in our conditions. How are we going to address the problems? I think it takes the leadership of the government to come up with long-term policies. The government should change its outdated policy of laissez-faire and positive non-intervention. It's high time for us to put together our heads so that our collective wisdom would result in the right policies. For the Hong Kong Growth Portfolio under the Future Fund, I think it is the best time to do so that we can promote growth and we can find and fund the unicorns. On the other hand, for the Future Fund, I think we should enhance the investment structure. In particular, there should be an appropriate portion of renminbi assets so that we can have more assets that are denominated in renminbi. Well, for our renminbi pool, in recent years, the growth rate has been very slow. As of the end of the month, it was a mere $900 billion by way of the renminbi savings. More proactive measures are needed so that there will be a growing demand for renminbi investment. In fact, our nation is one of the fastest growing economies in the world. Many sovereign funds have obviously and visibly increased their investment in our national projects. For Temasek Holdings, the proportion has been raised to 29%, so overtaking the Singaporean projects, and mainland China takes up the largest share. Later on, the level came down a bit, but I believe that it will still be the trend to go. So for our SAR government, we should optimize our portfolios by increasing the weight of RMT assets. We should also think in terms of seed funds so that we can have matching investments. And thirdly, the Future Fund is a landmark PE. I think the government has this vision to encourage private equity as well as venture capital. I think with the new trends in the world, I think the future growth should also look at investments under RCEP. This is the ASEAN plus China, Japan, Korea, etc. I think we cannot afford to miss this golden opportunity, so I spoke. Mr. Frankie YICK. Thank you, Mr. President. The economy is slowing down, population is aging. Our public expenditure will be increasing all the time to support our long-term expenditure. In year 2016, we have got a 10-year savings plan called Future Fund. And then later on, we got the Hong Kong Growth Portfolio, under which we have the Strategic Tech Fund as well as the GBA Investment Fund. For the government to save for the rainy days, it has the support of the Liberal Party. But then the government should be more proactive and play a more direct role. For the emerging industries, I think we should emphasize the emerging industries, but we mustn't do it at the expense of our established industries. We have got 4 such. Tourism, logistics, professional and business support, etc. For the past 5 years, because of the Black Riot as well as the pandemic, the 4 industries might have got a smaller contribution towards our GDP, but then they're still accounting for 50% and 40% in terms of the GDP as well as the labor force. We can see that the 4 established industries are still important for our economy. With the new trends of digitalization, for us to have a development of our logistics industry, we need to apply innovation technology. So both would go hand in hand. And we need a diversified economic structure, which will also sustain our economic development. Industries without government support and enhancement will never see sustainable development. Singapore, Shanghai, and London have got public organizations or government support. But in the case of Hong Kong, for the digitalization of our container port, there is the so-called smart port. For many years, the government has left it in the hands of the operators, though lately the government has set up a working group on the development of a smart port. But then we are lagging behind because we started late. For the 14th five-year plan, as well as the outline development plan for the GBA, we have been given a clear role. And we should become an international transportation hub, and we should enhance the status of the logistics industry. 80% of our cargo is mainland related. To better integrate into the overall development of our nation, we need to enhance our efficiency in terms of port operation. In Zhuhai, we should have a logistics park. So that there will be packaging and screening on the mainland and tailored and coupled with GPS, the cargo can come to Hong Kong either reaching the airport or the Kwai Chung container port for onward transmitment to other places. Or we can go to the logistics park in Zhuhai, and then the overseas products can then be dispatched to other places from this Zhuhai facility. We can also resolve the problem of supply, land shortage and manpower shortage. The idea has got the support of the Zhuhai government. It is suggested that the governments on both sides should develop it. But then it is said that without a sovereign fund, we cannot do this. I think we should take the lead. With direct participation and investment, we can do it. It is important. Now, Hong Kong should become an innovation and technology hub, and therefore the government has come up with the Strategic Tech Fund. Why can't we also set up another fund for the established industries so as to carry out the necessary investment? For our air cargo, the throughput has always been ranked first in the world. Air cargo may only account for 2% of the total, but then the value of the cargo is 40%. In other words, air cargo would be very important for Hong Kong. Further development of air cargo trade would enhance our status as a transportation hub. To tie in with the positioning of Hong Kong under the 14th five-year plan, we must do this as soon as possible. We need to come up with a development blueprint and have the necessary investment. So I spoke. Thank you.
主席，
Dr. Johnny Ng. In 2016, the government set up the $220 billion Future Fund. The idea was to achieve a better return through long-term investment, and in the long run could improve the public finance structure. And eventually there was $220 billion was allocated for investment projects directly related to Hong Kong, such as projects on the new economy, innovation, technology, and so on. The wish is for better return. And now another $10 billion to be added, to be further allocated. $5 billion for the strategic tech fund and $5 billion for the GBA investment fund. So the Future Fund and the Hong Kong Growth portfolio will have room for further of a higher return rate. Many in the community believe that we should follow the practice of sovereign fund and strive for sovereign wealth fund and strive for a higher return rate like the Temasek fund. Now we have the scale for such a sovereign wealth fund, but because now the fund is managed by the Hong Kong under the exchange fund, and in accordance with the exchange fund ordinance, the exchange fund is mainly for the purpose of maintaining the monetary stability. It's not for making investments. So a conservative approach is adopted, and so we're not able to get a higher return rate. And then we cannot promote the development of Hong Kong. Now we've been striving to promote the industrial development and other development, so we need to set aside a portion of fund so that there will be separate body directly managing the fund, and then we could strive for higher return rate. At the same time, we could improve the structure of our public finances in the long run. And then we could also make strategic investment in promoting the development of different industries. The government should take the lead to invest more in innovation and technology. Now, our INT capabilities are recognized by the government. That's why the National 14th Plan, Hong Kong will develop into an international INT hub. And then the GBA development will also provide unprecedented opportunities to Hong Kong. At the same time, we could promote a digital economy and speed up reindustrialization. We could also help different industries to go for digital transformation, and then we could enhance our competitiveness as a whole. Now, I would propose further that the government should set up investment or organization, and then a certain portion of the management funds fee should be used for supporting INT, and then it could be expanded to cover GBA as well, and then we could make our contribution to the country. Of course, there are many funds now supporting INT development. At the same time, there are many areas omitted. For example, in applying for paid pins to protect R&D results, and then for the R&D results to be commercialized. Right now, we have patent subsidy scheme, and then individuals and companies will be given assistance to apply for a patent. But after that, there's no follow-up support. We cannot help to turn this R&D outcome into cannot help with the commercialization R&D outcome. So there should be further follow-up action, and then this can be done by this fund, and then we could further promote the development of INT and commercialization. Now, we're actively promoting digital economy, so there could be a dedicated fund for supporting R&D projects that will speed up digital development. Now, if the SAR government sets up this agency to invest to handle investment, I'm sure Hong Kong will become an international INT center. And then there will be new economic growth point for Hong Kong, and that will bring even greater economic and social benefits to Hong Kong. Thank you. Dr. Stephen Wong. I support the original motion. In the original motion, there's mentioned that the Future Fund, rather the Exchange Fund, there's room for improvement. Now, the Exchange Fund is meant to support the linked exchange rate, but then the exchange fund should also be actively improving the return rate. At the same time, there should be additional social benefits. For example, promoting the strategic development of our economy. In fact, just a few days ago, Temasek made an announcement. They have a new $3.6 billion investment to promote a global carbon reduction target. And then in the recent budget, two $5 billion funds that will be set up. One is the Strategic Tech Fund. So it's on strategic investment in R&T. That shows that the exchange rate is actually moving in this direction. So apart from supporting a linked exchange rate and striving for investment return, it will also make a strategic investment. So that's why I support the original motion that such a development should continue. Another point about who or how is a question of how now. Put simply, is to it's really a question of to procure or not to procure. So do you leave it to the GP, that is fund managers or government officials, to do the investment? Usually, it's a question of to procure or not to procure in public policies. In the Hong Kong growth portfolio, we have a procurement model as we resort to market forces and we work through fund managers. And fund managers are not trying to make investment return. They have a dual mandate. They are supposed to bring about additional development or additional progress. I agree with Mr. Wong. Now, apart from trying to get investment return, what else? What is it? The other parts, the work that they do. Can they tell us more about it? And if government officials are involved in investment, would that necessarily bring about the biggest social benefits? If you look at ITPS as an example, there are funds involved in co-investment, the government is involved as well. And then often people say if the government is involved, it actually stands in the way of the fund operation. So it's a question of to procure or not to procure. I think we could discuss it. I think the key issue is as my amendment says, whether you do it through the government or the fund manager, you need to have strategy, you need to have governance, you need to have supervision. So with governance and supervision and strategy, well, either you do it or you let fund managers do it, you can still achieve your strategic goals. So that's why I want to know whether who's doing it, whether it's the Hong Kong AMA or Hong Kong AMA engages a new body to do it. Would they be able to disclose their rate of return, and could they make clear explanations to the public, including the Legislative Council, on the strategic goals and the benefits the investment will bring? After how, now I want to talk about what. So what sort of strategies are we talking about here? Now, I think what deep tech is what has the biggest potential. In university research, with there's a scale there's a 1-to-1, and usually it takes time, some 10 to 20 years for us to see results, and so that's deep tech. So we adopt this deep tech mindset. Then we could make use of such funds that will bring us real investment return. At the same time, we could unleash the potential of the community. Thank you, Mr. Mr. Paul Chair. If I may just add, I just want to add a point or two to the motion. In principle, I support all the other amendments. Members mentioned the Temasek Fund. And we can see that it's a really staggering development from 1972. Initially, it started with 3.5 billion Singaporean dollars. Now is worth $381 billion. So it's something we should really make reference to. The original motion, well, in principle, is right, is that we shouldn't just focus on investment return, we should also consider other social benefits. But if I may just add, I don't think we could just focus on investment return alone, but at the same time, we can't ignore investment return because we have limited resources, so we need to recycle resources for different purposes. And then I also want to talk about transparency. Dr. Stephen Wong talked about transparency. I fully agree with him. Now, the Temasek Fund, which is an example of great success to us, initially it wasn't so transparent. It was only in 2004, before the fund became more transparent, they announced that the investment portfolio, the rate of the investment return, and so on. And now, in the latest website, you will see all the investment projects they have, the percentage, and the rate of return, and everything is as a glance. So that's the evolution of the Temasek Fund. Of course, we shouldn't learn from the Temasek Fund from the very beginning, but rather we should learn from the latest practice that is a high degree of transparency. And then with the exchange fund, we know it's not very transparent. They would only come to us to tell us a bit about the fund from time to time. But then the more transparent a fund is, the more benefits there are. We have appointed the so-called 8 general partners, GP. On the 3rd of September 2021, there was the government announcement that they've appointed 3 general partners. All 3 are based in Hong Kong. The headquarters are here. They have offices of a substantial scale, and they have over $100 billion of asset with a wealth of experience. That's all we are told. And then on the 30th of October 2021, they appointed another 5 GPs. The information is similar. They didn't mention the $100 billion scale. They just said that these are headquartered in Hong Kong. Their offices are of certain scale, and they have a wealth of investment experience. Well, I don't see why we need to be, we need to be so secretive about the identity, the experience of these GPs, or their involvement in Hong Kong and their performance and so on. We should have the right to know. There should be enough information for us to make our own judgment. Now, in terms of the fund and our investment portfolio and so on, it seems that we need to do more on transparency on different fronts. So that's why I am making these amendments to, further to add to the motion. I want to focus on recycling of resources, and I also want to talk about transparency so we know exactly what's going on. Thank you.
The Honorable Tan Yueheng. Thank you, President. First, I want to thank Ms. Wendy Yueheng for his original motion. We are discussing this framework of Future Fund and Hong Kong Growth Portfolio to help transformation of our economy. We must diversify our industry structure to deal with deep-seated livelihood issues. So I agree with Ms. Wendy Hong's original motion. We should make good use of our Future Fund and Hong Kong Growth Portfolio, HKGP, to focus on the long-term improvements of Hong Kong's industry structure. We should not just focus on short-term investment returns. We can consider having a specialized institution to invest in considering long-term investment items. Now, I would like to further the original motion from the following 2 perspectives. First is the operation of the FF and the HKGP. We can consider setting up a government-led fund of funds to attract more private capital for investment so as to give full play to the guiding role of government capital. While we have a very strong exchange fund, but various anti-epidemic measures have depleted our balance, and in the long term, we should make savings and boost revenue. The exchange fund must continue to grow and contain risks. A government-led fund of funds can invest in various funds so that we can manage risks, and quality funds should have GP with top-notch professionals in the industry. And so a government-led fund of funds is more suitable for future investment. After all, government funds are limited for support to individual projects and also industries. Our resources are limited. We can use the government-led fund to invest in new projects such as new energy industries. We can invest in fundamental industries to attract more private capital for investment to promote development of new industries. Secondly, in the HK GP, we must nurture a group of influential enterprises so that we can have a clustering effect of INT. Now, the HK GP doesn't invest in individual projects, but in terms of strategy, we can consider looking at the 8 GPs to identify and nurture local unicorns. We can also require GPs to look at our strengths of the local universities for transformation of scientific and R&D products. In this regard, we have got AI, and we should develop more influential enterprises so that we can have an industry train from the top to the bottom. And Singapore has done a good job in this regard. Singapore has the highest number of unicorns. In 2010, there were 13 unicorns. For every million of population, there was 2.8 unicorn, a figure higher than that of the US. That goes to show that the INT ecosystem of Singapore is attractive, and Hong Kong must make more efforts, not just by channeling funds, but we should make use of the GBA development in Guangzhou and Shenzhen. We can coordinate with them. There should be close interaction with Guangdong and Shenzhen so that we can complement one another's strengths and we can enhance Hong Kong's development into an INT hub. Thank you. Mr. Sunny Tan. President, I speak to support Dr. Wendy Hong's original motion and the other amendments. Now, Dr. Hong's amendment asks us to make good use of the FF and also Hong Kong GP to diversify our industry structure. This is supportable. The fund was set up in 2016 and it has accumulated more than $100 billion of return, and the balance stands at $220 billion, accounting for one quarter of our reserves. So we have a very strong FF fund. The FS has also said that we are going to set aside 10% of the FF. $5 billion will be used to set up a strategic tech fund, and another $5 billion for a GBA investment fund. Now, we call these Hong Kong-style Temasek Fund. People have high expectations for these funds. Hopefully, we can help industries with the potential to develop. Now, for Temasek in Singapore, as at March this year, their portfolio has a value of 1.8 trillion Hong Kong dollars. Well, the growth was over $1 trillion. So they have made remarkable success. The operation of the Hong Kong GP has a few points to learn from the Temasek Fund. The Temasek Fund has got very clear objectives for the future. In the coming few years, they are going to focus on 4 structures. Cross-industry digital technology is among them. This can dovetail the development of Singapore's economy. It has got very clear investment objectives and returns. And thirdly, they have a very professional team of investors. Now, they have experts for respective industries to help their team to make proper and smart investment decisions. We should learn from Singapore so that we can further enhance the management of FF and HKGP. I think in vetting investment projects, the government should provide more support to Hong Kong's traditional industries with advantages and also manufacturing industries in upgrading. Our traditional industries with advantages and our manufacturing industries have a very strong background. Take the garment and textile industry I represent example. As said, this year we have 134 listed companies. 13 of them have a market capital of over $10 billion. According to WTO's report last year, while Hong Kong ranked 9th when it comes to the export of garments, and the value of exports was $63.9 billion. So traditional industries are contributing a lot to our economy. So the FF and HKGP should not just invest in new emerging industries. We should also invest in traditional industries with a good foundation so that we can enhance their upgrading. So long as we give them some facilitation, some of them can become market leaders and even unicorns. When we have more matured emerging industries, and when our traditional industries and manufacturing industries are relaunched, then we can have really diversification of our industry structure. So in considering investment scope and investment, we should not just consider investment returns. We should also consider the social returns and development opportunities for our young people, and also the importance of further strategic development of Hong Kong. Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury. President, first, I'm very grateful to Dr. Wendy Hong's motion on making good use of the Future Fund and Hong Kong Growth.Portfo.to to promote the diversification of industry structure, so that the Council has this opportunity to discuss this very meaningful topic. In 2016, the Future Fund was established administratively to bring about more aggressive returns through long-term investment. Before 2020, the whole amount was placed with the Exchange Fund, with returns linked to its long-term growth portfolio and investment portfolio. However, to avoid real or perceived conflict of interest and out of consideration to maintain monetary stability and impact on our market, the Exchange Fund in general do not invest in local asset or projects with a Hong Kong nexus. The fund has been operating smoothly. As of 2020, the average composite return was around 8.2%. For better use of the FF has announced in his 2019-20 budget that will invite a few financial and business leaders to advise him on the investment strategy, the portfolio, and diversification of the FF. The relevant expert team reported to the administration after detailed discussions and consideration. In the 2020-21 budget, the FS announced that recommendations from the expert team were accepted, and that is to set aside about 10% of the FF or $22 billion to set up the Hong Kong Growth.Portfo.to, HKGP, for direct investment in projects with a Hong Kong nexus, with a view to reinforcing Hong Kong's status as a financial, commercial, and innovation center, while raising Hong Kong's productivity and competitiveness in the long term to strive for reasonable risk-adjusted returns. This portfolio is in agreement with Dr. Wendy Hong's idea about promoting the diversification of Hong Kong industry structure and development. as stated in her motion. When it comes to the governance framework, according to the expert team, Hong Kong should set up a two-tier committee framework, including a governance committee, GC, and an investment committee, IC, with their respective terms of reference. GC is chaired by the Financial Secretary and comprises 6 non-official members with rich experience in investment to provide strategic steer and give guidance on matters such as investment mandate and asset allocation to the FS. The IC is chaired by the Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury and comprises representatives from relevant government agencies to decide on the appointment of general partners who will make investments for the HKGP. The Hong Kong MA provides the necessary administrative support to the HKGP, including identifying general partners, GP, for the Hong Kong GP and to carry out due diligence checks. To avoid any potential real or perceived conflict of interest, the expert team advised the government against taking part in the vetting of any investment projects or influences individual investment decisions. And there should be an effective mechanism set up to avoid conflict of interest. And therefore, the HKGP is so designed that general partners will be appointed by IC for making investment. The government has been following up on the relevant work, and HKGP has made good progress. So far, the government has appointed 8 GPs involving a wide scope of industries, including technology, healthcare, logistics and supply chain management, commercial and financial services, and consumer products. The government will continue to identify quality general partners to invest for Hong Kong's future and will closely monitor the performance of these appointed GPs. On the other hand, the FS in his 2022-23 budget announced that there will be another $10 billion injection into HKGP, $5 million of which will be used to set up a new investment fund called the Strategic Tech Fund. The government is making preparation, and we invite the Hong Kong Science and Technology Park Corporation and the Cyberport to identify technology enterprises of strategic value that can help to enrich our investment opportunities and ecosystem. As for the other $5 billion, it will be used to set up a GBA development fund to focus on investment opportunities in GBA. The fund will focus on GBA projects that can benefit Hong Kong, including companies based in Hong Kong and also companies investing in GBA. HKGB's IC will follow the investment mandate and also the specific policy objectives and investment direction for GBA development fund set up by the GC. The FS and TB will set up the GBA development fund with the support of Hong Kong MA. Looking forward, the government will from time to time review the investment performance of HKGP and will also listen to the views from different sectors of the community and make appropriate improvements. I noticed that in today's motion, members have moved various amendments and give suggestions on how to improve HKGB. We attach a lot of significance to this motion, and we have a number of representatives from the government present. We'll listen very carefully to remarks by members, and then we will give a consolidated reply. Thank you.
Mr. Lai Tong Kwok, President, the Future Fund is a long-term savings plan for us to face long-term challenges, so they should not be used like any general expenditure. there is a two-tier system in deciding the future fund. At first, we had the land fund with a balance of $129 billion. That forms the startup fund for the future fund. And then the future fund is put in the exchange fund for investment for at least 10 years. So that the future fund is therefore subject to the land fund resolution and the exchange fund ordinance. With this very stringent regulation, then what can we? Is there any room for improvement? Now, the future fund first, in terms of the rate of return, some complaints is too conservative, but then there are various investment portfolios with different targets. So the rate of the risk and the rate of return will be different. From 2009 to 2019, in 10 years, the return rate is just 2.9%. But for the long-term growth portfolio, such as private equity and land and housing investment, the average the rate of return is 12.5% for the same decade. So, and then by 2019, the growth, there's already $116 billion in long-term investment. We're making good use of the future fund. I think we have to look at how it's being used. In the past 2 years, our economy is not doing so well. In 2021 to 2020, the government for the first time returned $50 billion to the general revenue. And then it's also announced that $100 billion are set aside in the future fund for speeding up the development of the northern metropolis. Now, there's an important plan to promote our future development integration to the national development, so it's definitely an investment in the future. The government is now playing a more proactive role. So the motion says that we should set up an investment institutions to directly make investment. I have reservations about that because the first government is taken 10% from the future fund for setting up the Hong Kong growth portfolio. The expert group have made it clear that the official government civil service should avoid from becoming involved in investment decisions, because we don't want any hidden or perceived conflict of interest. If the SAR government is directly involved in investment, it will go against that principle. Secondly, now it's not easy for the government to identify such investment talents. If we leave it to officials, we might as well keep to the current approach. That is, we have general partners, and then we rely on their expertise and wealth of experience to build up diversified investment portfolio. And then we could identify quality investment projects for Hong Kong. Now, for the $200 billion in future fund, much of the money is kept in the exchange fund. One of the important reasons is that we could increase the financial resources of the exchange fund. Basic law states that the SAO government will provide a suitable legal and financial environment to maintain Hong Kong status as an international center, as international financial center. The future fund is important in that respect. This is an important weapon for us in keeping our status as an international financial center. You know, the global environment is changing rapidly, and we really should not reduce the balance of the future fund arbitrarily. Dr. Low Kwok. First, I would like to thank Dr. Wendy Hong for moving the motion and other members for moving the amendments on making good use of the future fund and the Hong Kong growth portfolio to promote diversification of the industrial structure. I am in support of that. The government wants to have better investment returns, so we set up the future fund in 2016, and then the balance of the land fund was injected into the future fund. That was about $100 billion. And then in 2020, the government announced allocating $22 billion to establish the Hong Kong growth portfolio. This is to reinforce Hong Kong's status as a financial, commercial, and innovation technology center. In the budget this year, the financial secretary says that another $10 billion will be allocated from the Hong Kong GP to set up a $5 billion strategic tech fund, and then it will help to identify businesses of strategic importance to Hong Kong. And not the other $5 billion is for setting up the GBA investment fund. It will promote the development of different industries with advantage. Now we are facing rapidly changing global environment. Also, there's increasing competition among economies around the world. As the CEO-elect Mr. John Lee mentions in his manifesto, we must keep enhancing our competitiveness, so there's room for continuous development. So we need, I believe the Future Fund is an important element to lead the investment in a certain direction. So we need to have a comprehensive outlook here and review the investment objectives of the fund. We shouldn't just focus on the return rate. We should focus more on the fund leading the diversification of the industrial structure. I have previously asked the government to come up with a comprehensive and long-term policy on industrial development. We should support different industries and sectors such as the financial sector, tourism, and so logistics and so on. We also need to promote new development of new industries such as testing and certification, arts and culture, and creative industries, and so on. And then in June, the Shenzhen municipal government published an opinion on development of digital economy, such as promoting and blockchain industry and so on. I think Hong Kong could learn from this plan, and we could actively take part in GBA development. And then we could also achieve the targets set in the National 14th Five-Year Plan. We could develop Hong Kong into an international I&T center, which should focus on robotics, artificial intelligence, mobile communications, Internet of Things, blockchain. We should promote all such R&D and development. And then we could also promote commercialization of R&D outcome. We should also promote strategic investment in infrastructure. The FS announced that $100 billion will be set aside for a dedicated fund to speed up the development of the Northern Metropolis infrastructure, and I support that. On investment, the government should play a more proactive role. We could use the Future Fund as a basis, and the government could set up a government-led investment fund. There could be greater matching elements, so we could bring more private capitals to invest in the fund. And then there will be close connection between the government and the market. The government should also issue government bonds in relation to the Future Fund. We could then expand the scale of the fund. At the same time, we could provide safe investment channel for the public, and we could join in this development and share in the fruits of the development. So I speak. Thank you. Mrs. Regina Ip. Thank you, President. I'm grateful to Dr. Wendy Hong for moving this very interesting motion, and I thank members too for moving their amendments. Now, but my own view is that in Dr. Hong's original motion is about using the land fund or the future fund to expand our economic structure. So either whether we invest in innovation technology or in traditional industries, or with a view to narrowing the wealth gap, this could be against the law. Now, the secretary was too polite to mention that. In fact, in the exchange fund sections 3(1)(2), the primary purpose of the exchange fund, as Dr. Johnny mentioned, is to maintain the stability of our linked exchange rate. It's also to maintain Hong Kong's position as an international financial center. So for the $300 billion exchange fund, we can't use it casually in any way. Now, after the Lehman crisis, many in this council questioned that how come the Hong Kong MA chief executive is so conservative in that they only buy U.S. bonds. It's because the fund needs to keep a large amount of marketable cash or securities. That means if there should be fluctuations in exchange rates, the MA could intervene anytime. We can't invest it in brick and mortar because then we can't use the money anytime. So how come then we are spending $10 billion to set up the Strategic Tech Fund and the GBA Investment Fund? Because $10 billion compared to the $300 billion is nothing. It's just a drop in the bucket. So we could just use that for diversifying investment, but we can't use a huge sum. We can't do like the Temasek to spend hundreds of billions of dollars in investment. If we want to do that, we can't take it from the exchange fund. So many question how come we can't set up a Temasek fund like Singapore? Well, the Temasek fund is a sovereign wealth fund. So how come we're not doing that? Well, one reason is because the government has always been very prudent with the management of public finances. But we can do it, but we don't need to spend money. There's a way to do it. Some experts tell me that the Temasek fund, has seen growth as soon as it was set up because the Singaporean government injected a lot of undervalued assets into the fund. And so that's why we see increase in value of the fund. In Hong Kong, we could do the same. We have two tunnels wholly owned by the SL government. The Cross Harbour tunnel is definitely making it's profitable. And next year, the Western Harbour Crossing is to be returned to the government, so we can package these three tunnels and set up a fund, and immediately we could, first undervalue the assets, and then once the fund is set up, the value will grow, and then we could set up this wealth fund, and then the return could be used on investing in the GBA or the Northern Metropolis. But we must not touch the exchange fund. As for the future fund, as Mr. Lai Kung Kwok pointed out, for the first money, the first sum, $219.7 billion, it came from the land fund. The land fund is subject to the joint declaration, Annex 3. The money could only be spent on infrastructure building. If you use that money to narrow the wealth gap or to invest in traditional industries and emerging industries, well, there's a need for resolution to be passed by this council before we could do that. So we can't just spend this money any way we want. But I think we should consider setting up some sort of a wealth fund. If the government doesn't want to spend money now, and now with very tense geopolitical situation, we must keep the stability of the exchange fund. What if someone tries to attack the Hong Kong dollar, or if there should be imposition of financial sanctions on Hong Kong, that we need to have the ammunition to fight that battle. If we want to set up a wealth fund, maybe we could consider injecting the free tunnels, packaging free tunnels into a fund. Thank you.
Mr. Jeffrey Lam. Thank you, President. Hong Kong developed from a fishing port to a finance and a commercial and aviation hub. This is because in the past we did invest in the future. Now we have a very good infrastructure, and Hong Kong can strike for the best with no worries. And of course, we have to mention the Rose Garden scheme. The program consisted a 30-year development involving the airport on Lantau. And the end of one program should mark the beginning of a new one. The government has proposed a number of new developments for the future. The Northern Metropolis is an innovative and forward-looking concept. It can improve the interface between Hong Kong and other cities in GBA, and also in line with the country's 14th five-year plan, and can enhance cooperation with Shanghai in INT industries. Developing the Northern Metropolis can ensure that we integrate into the overall development of the country. I'm sure that is conducive to enhancing our competitiveness and can ensure long-term prosperity and stability of Hong Kong. The business sector has every support for this scheme. Now, no matter how grand the plan is, we need sufficient financial backing and proper planning. While we want the Northern Metropolis to be built, we are concerned as to where the finance would come from. And the public would want a timetable and a planning framework. The government should show us these as soon as possible, including ways of financing and also the overall budget. When the government gives us the planning framework, we've also got the Hong Kong PG to invest in projects with a Hong Kong nexus. I think the financing arrangement and operation should be fine-tuned as well. Now, for all development, they should be infrastructure-led. We should consider different ways of financing. If the government can increase injection to HKPG, then we can save for rainy days. But then the government should also explore new sources of funding. I have said a number of times that while we develop the Northern Metropolis, we can follow the model of Sha Tin City 1. We can set up a private company, and then part of the funding can come from the Future Fund, and bonds can be issued. Members of the public can subscribe to the bonds, and then they can share in the fruits of the development. This can lower the argument that the allocation of public fund is uneven. Take the construction of the third runway as an example. It has a public-private partnership model compared with other government projects. Now, the airport authority is tasked to oversee the development. As a result, the AA has some stick to its original budget. There's been no cost overrun and is also delivered on time. We have many infrastructure projects developed through public-private partnership. In the past decades, these have become important driving force of our development. So the government should make good use of the Future Fund and the Hong Kong growth portfolio. But I also urge the administration to expedite the use of public-private partnership in development of the NT and also large-scale urban renewal projects. Now, of course, while we are on the subject of development in the NT, we must mention resuming normal travel across the boundary. If we cannot link up with other cities of GBA through the Northern Metropolis, that would be a setback to further development of Hong Kong. We look to the new government led by Mr. Johnny to open up the borders again with other cities of the GBA. Thank you, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Duncan Chiu, Mr. Deputy, a few days back, the 6th of June now, we've been talking about Temasek. Temasek launched a Gen Zero fund that cost $5 billion. Temasek Fund has been leading the future investment direction of Singapore. It can multiply government funds to attract investors. Now, we talked about government funds, and I don't know whether my understanding is correct. There was a clawback of $22 billion from Exchange Fund to the Future Fund. I don't know whether the operation will be managed in the same way as the Exchange Fund. Administration may want to clarify. Last year, there was $220 billion, $22 billion for establishment of the HKGP, and this year we have another $5 billion for 2 funds respectively. Now, we are very concerned about the following: the ITVF and also the Cyberport Investment Fund. I have taken part in the 2 funds with a lot of input. We might be confused about the $220 billion future fund. Now, I think we should focus more on the $5 billion strategic tech fund. Now, we have seen many government funds for technology. Most of them are managed by professional teams. You talked about Temasek. Now, in the country, we have a Huanbo Fund. It is similar to the Shenzhen Capital Group Company Limited. Why was a Huanbo Fund a failure? Because it was managed by the government and the investment return was limited, whereas for Shenzhen Capital Group Company Limited and is mainly managed by professional investors. Now, I cannot agree with the motion debate and also the amendments. Some members may not have a sufficient understanding of the operation. When we invest in the future, we must invest in industries with a future, something that we should invest in charitable causes or old traditional industries and to support the development of young people. I think this goes against the intention of having a future fund. We can help these areas through other plans, but then for a future fund, we must have professional teams to help the government to invest. Otherwise, the fund will be neither here nor there eventually. This is something I want to stress. Now, I'd like to comment on the amendment by Mr. Frankie YICK to invest in the 4 key established industries. I think this runs counter to the intention or objective of the fund, so I wouldn't vote against this amendment. And Mr. Johnny Ng said that the GPs are not has only give us a limited return. Well, they haven't really started the work. How can you say that the return is limited? And in March, the FS said that in 2015 to 2022, the return for FF was around 15%. I think that is acceptable. You can't really call that a low investment return. And if members support this motion, I think they have got the figures wrong. As for setting aside 1 to 2% of the administrative fees to support other development, I think they don't really understand the operation of funds. I don't know how much is paid by the government to GPs, but I think the 1 to 2% is for employing experts to help with investment. And if you want some of the fees to support other areas, then I don't know what professionals we can employ. This goes to show that he doesn't have a proper understanding of funds. So I oppose this motion. The FF is most important for the future of Hong Kong. I hope you can explore the achievement of this portfolio. Dr. Dennis Lam. First, I want to thank Dr. Wendy Hong for moving this motion so that we can review the administration's policies in investment due to geopolitical tensions and also escalation of various disputes. Now, even the Central Bank of Norway said that we must manage risk properly because of the global situation. The road is full of challenges ahead, and therefore the government should be conservative in managing its finances. Policies should not be changed arbitrarily, but then the government should invest in a way to promote diversification of industry structure in future industries, emerging industries in particular, should be supported. FF is a way to enhance our investment return. It has earned more than $100 billion for us in the past few years, as we call back to government account, and we must give recognition to the hard work of Hong Kong MA. Hong Kong is a highly external economy. Because of the changing global scene, we must be prepared for challenges ahead, and therefore a stable investment return is indispensable. Our investment policies should not change arbitrarily. As regards the Hong Kong GP, it has got another $22 billion, and the Finance Committee has allocate $5 billion to the Strategic Tech Fund and the GPA Development Fund, respectively, to invest in qualitative industries. I'm sure that can contribute to our economic growth. Where resources permit, the government should be involved in investments and in the community. This can help to develop our economy and bring opportunities to our young people. This is conducive to the long-term development of Hong Kong. I hope the government can keep up with its efforts and review and improve the arrangement as appropriate. The motion is about whether the government should be directly involved in startups and investment. Now, we should not just have our eyes on investment returns. Now, if we're going to do that, we must have very strict restrictions on the scope of investment, and the whole thing must be very transparent to avoid burdening our public finances. Besides, to promote diversification of industry structure, we don't necessarily need government intervention. Many large enterprises have grown without relying on government efforts. The government can consider using public policies such as tax and land concessions so that Hong Kong can be a good place for development of various industries. With these remarks, I support the motion.
Mr. Chen Kin-po. Thank you, Mr. Deputy. We have got sound fiscal reserves. $220 billion were used to set up the Future Fund in 2016 so as to get a higher rate of return to meet the financial pressure brought about by aging population. In 2020, $22 billion have been set aside from the Future Fund to set up the Hong Kong Growth Portfolio to make strategic investments with the Hong Kong nexus to reinforce Hong Kong's status as a financial, commercial, and innovation technology and to enhance our long-term competitiveness. Now, there are calls for Hong Kong to set up an investment fund so as to get a better return and to drive economic development. I'm grateful to Dr. Hong for sponsoring the motion. Most would agree that we need to use the Future Fund to drive economic growth and industrial development. Now, $10 billion will be set aside to set up two funds. First of all, the Strategic Technology Fund, so that we can drive the development of innovation technology. A number of amendments have been proposed as to how the government should promote development, like investing in university projects, subsidizing unicorns, and promoting renminbi business. The government will study that. We have already got the corresponding funds, and they have their own practices. I think the ultimate question is the mode of management. There are two possibilities. First of all, the Hong Kong MA will continue to coordinate the investment and supervise the fund managers, or the government can have a direct role in investment. I think both have got their pros and cons. Currently, the FF is with the exchange fund. The Hong Kong MA invests the money. We are bound by the investment guidelines of the Hong Kong MA. But then the Hong Kong MA is rich in experience to choose fund managers. The government doesn't intervene. We can avoid conflict of interest. But then we are bound by the exchange fund restraints, and we cannot invest locally or on the mainland. Well, mainly speaking, the Hong Kong MA is responsible for the administrative work. And then for the Hong Kong growth portfolio, we can invest in Hong Kong. I think we can make reference to the Temasek holdings wholly owned by the government of Singapore. They can be direct investment. The advantage is that the government can be flexible in its investment strategy and can help with the development of the city. But then the government lacks investment experts, and many will accuse the government of conflict of interest. And then if the investment fails, then you will be alleged for wrongdoing as well. Sometimes investment decisions are also wrong, so there is a high level of risk. Under this model, you can also have the government supervising but not responsible for choosing the investment items, leaving it in the hands of the experts. As Mr. Duncan Chiu has pointed out, under such an approach, the government avoids direct involvement. It only plays the role of supervision. It stands a high chance of being successful. But then we need to strike a balance. We need to have checks and balances. That has to be considered. There are pros and cons in relation to the two different models. I'm sure the government must carry out an in-depth study so as to choose the right choice. Other than the reasonable rate of return, we will also want to drive economic development. Thank you. Mr. Yim Kong. Thank you, Mr. Deputy. I'm grateful to Dr. Hong for sponsoring this motion so that we can consider how to invest so as to drive better economic development in Hong Kong. For the Future Fund, part of the fund has been set aside to establish the Hong Kong growth portfolio to make investments with a Hong Kong nexus to reinforce Hong Kong's status as a financial, commercial, and innovation technology center and enhance our long-term productivity and competitiveness. In this year's budget, the government would like to spend $10 billion more on the Hong Kong growth portfolio so as to set up the strategic tech fund, so as to invest in innovation technology items that have got a future, and we can also benefit the enterprises and then contributing to our employment and our economic development. The GBA investment fund will also be set up, focusing on the GBA so as to add to the momentum of the growth there. This will also bring about social and economic benefits to Hong Kong. It shows that the Hong Kong government is aware of the need to spend the fiscal reserves in such a way that other than providing stability, we should also use it to drive economic development. It has my sort of support. For the Future Fund, for the Hong Kong growth portfolio, how should it be used? I think citizens are not fully aware of the details, but then they are concerned. For the Hong Kong growth portfolio, I think the operation lacks transparency. I think there should be regular announcements. I understand the government is making preparations. The government hasn't been spending a lot to drive economic development, even if we are to implement the policies announced in the budget, but then we are only talking about $30 billion or so. It would be less than 4% of the total fiscal reserves. On my part, I think we should enhance the scale, and we should also set aside more money for the Hong Kong growth portfolio. We should also set up different funds or portfolios that can promote our economic development. As far as our fiscal reserves are concerned, we should be reviewing the size of the reserves, and then we should find a clear a blueprint for our economic development. And there should be investment guidelines. The government should play a proper role. The government should play an appropriate role in relation to the investment. For the Future Fund, it is deposited with the Exchange Fund. The Hong Kong MA has got its own rules in relation to investment and stabilizing the exchange rate, rate of return, among other things, are to be considered. For the Hong Kong growth portfolio, we want to back up real economy projects, especially those in the GBA. So I think we should have an independent management of the Hong Kong growth portfolio. But then for the $300 billion Hong Kong Future Fund, should it be directly managed by the Hong Kong government? I think that's a separate issue. It should be considered carefully. Thank you. Does any member wish to speak?
如果冇請
If not, Dr. Wendy Hong, you may now speak on the amendments. Mr. Deputy, a total of 8 members propose amendments to the motion, and other members also share their views. I'd like to thank them all for their insights. This is certainly a controversial issue, and I have done a lot of research recently. The Governance Committee of the Hong Kong Growth Portfolio consists of 8 official members, and I spoke to 5 of them, and I also spoke to many experts from the financial experts as well as mainland officials. I consolidated the views offered by different members and experts, and I summarized their views. First of all, and I urge a Hong Kong venture fund to be set up. The government venture fund would not come into conflict with the current exchange fund, and the EF would not be affected. I agree with Mrs. Regina Yip. The EF exercises the function of ensuring fiscal stability, and they must ensure healthy circulation. But our goal is to improve our long-term public finances by making structural changes. That is why it is called the Future Fund. The FF only makes up less than 5% of the EF, so the fundamentals would not be moved. We should adopt a more visionary approach. Dr. Kennedy Wong proposed increasing the ratio of renminbi investments, and under the risk of sanctions from the U.S., many countries have considered delinking from the U.S. dollar in terms of promoting and promoting the internationalization of RMB. Can we do something more? The proposed government venture fund is independently run, and the government has no part to play in its operation. But as an investor, it should offer strategic directions, and we can learn from plenty of success examples. Number 3, in terms of goals and positioning, Mr. Michael Look and Dr. Stephen Wong said that we must maximize the social benefits, and I agree with them. Both funds should be more strategic in nature to create new directions for Hong Kong to the benefit of our young people. Number 4, in terms of the source of funds, Dr. Tan Yueheng proposed the setting up of a new fund with participation from the private market, and I agree with his view. We must have more universal participation to achieve success. Mr. Michael Look, the Temasek Holdings have issued funds twice already. They have a diversified portfolio and a successful track record. After the Future Fund and Hong Kong Growth Portfolio get on track, this could be a direction to go. In terms of the management of funds, Dr. Stephen Wong and Mr. Paul Chair talked about the need to increase transparency and to disclose information to the public, and I agree with them. For the proposed government venture fund, the government would bear a certain risk, but proper governance and explanation to the public would serve its purpose, and I believe they would not be blaming the government. We should establish a blueprint for industrial development. A number of members said we should have a blueprint under the context of the National 14th Five-Year Plan. We should set sights on the nation as well as the Greater Bay Area, and we should foster holistic collaboration. This is not the first time I explore the or discuss the operation of these two funds at LegCo. I will continue to monitor the operation of these funds so that resources would end up at the right places to the benefit of our future. Thank you.
Under Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury. President, first, let me once again thank Dr. Wendy Hung for moving the original motion and 8 members who form amendments to the motion and members who have spoken on the motion on how to make good use of the Future Fund and the Hong Kong Growth Portfolio to promote the diversification of industry structure. I thank them for the valuable comments received. I will first give a consolidated reply, and our colleagues from respective policy bureaus will also respond. Dr. Wendy Hung's original motion asked the government to nurture new economic growth spots such as INT industries, strategic emerging industries, and manufacturing industries so as to promote the diversification of Hong Kong's industry structure. As I said in my opening remarks, the government hopes to make use of the FF to set up an HKGP so that we can have a policy-led strategy of investment, that is to invest in projects with a Hong Kong nexus to go for long-term competitiveness. And I think this is in line with Dr. Hung's idea in her original motion. Dr. Hung asked that GPs should not just focus on investment returns, but also to take long-term improvements of Hong Kong's industry structure and employment structure as the investment objectives. A number of members have mentioned that they would like Hong Kong GP to play a greater role. They should actively nurture our traditional industries with advantages and our manufacturing industry and also emerging industries such as INT, new technology, and new energy. In fact, this is our intention as well, and therefore the Financial Secretary transferred part of our FF deposited with Hong Kong Exchange Fund to set up the HKGP. While we try to secure reasonable risk-adjusted return, we want to enhance Hong Kong's status as a financial, commerce, and innovation center so as to enhance Hong Kong's competitiveness and productivity in the long run. So far, the government has appointed 8 GPs, general partners. Now, they focus on a wide scope of investment, including technology, healthcare, logistics, and supply chain management, commerce and financial services, and consumer products. Institutions appointed have rich experience in projects with a Hong Kong nexus, including projects in Hong Kong and GBA. Now, they're going to identify projects for Hong Kong GBA, and the industries would cover INT, traditional industries, healthcare, and consumer products. Relying on the expertise and experience of these institutions straddling different industries and investment, we are confident the participation can help us to establish a diversified portfolio. Apart from securing investment returns, we hope that these GPs can help us to invest in private equity investment and venture capital. While we consolidate the development of industries with advantages, we also like to find new growth points to create job opportunities and to inject new impetus into our economy. They will include local startups to enrich our INT ecosystem, and we can also invest in certain companies to attract them to move to Hong Kong and consider Hong Kong their important markets. The investment objectives are clearly reflected in the investment mandate formulated by the Governance Committee. We will closely monitor the performance of the appointed GPs. Some members also suggested that the HKGP should dovetail with the National 14th Five-Year Plan and the development of Guangdong Hong Kong GBA to help expand Hong Kong enterprises to the GBA and to further integrate into the national development. I fully agree that GBA development is an important strategic development of the country. GBA will also be an important market for us in the future. And therefore, the FS in his 2020-23 budget announced the establishment of the GBA Development Fund to focus on projects in the GBA that can benefit Hong Kong, and they include companies that are Hong Kong-based and also companies investing in GBA. The FS and TB, with the support of the Hong Kong MA, will press ahead with the establishment of the GBA Development Fund. The Investment Committee of Hong Kong GP, based on investment mandates and also specific policy objectives of an investment direction devised by the Governance Committee, will formulate investment criteria and selection criteria for the IC to approve. Of course, we noticed that members of the view that we are rather passive in investing the HKGP, and institutions may focus more on investment return rather than public objectives. When it comes to the design concept of the Hong Kong GP, the expert team's main concern is that the governing framework and the arrangement will comply with the statutory duties of the Land Fund, including whether the government has got sufficient ability and experience to examine individual investment projects. We should note that the HKGB is set up with money from the Land Fund. Under Cap 2.0, the FS may, in its discretion, authorize and direct the investment of any assets of the Land Fund which are not immediately required to meet expenses in respect of the Land Fund at any time in such manner as he may determine. Under this regulation, the HKPG investments must come with good justifications, including a professional risk and return assessment and analysis. As I said in my opening remarks, the expert team's study also focused on whether the relevant framework is in line with the characteristics of private equity investment and possible conflict of interest in investment. After many rounds of due consideration, the expert team was of the view that it would be more appropriate for the government to appoint professional GPs to invest for the Hong Kong GP rather than for the government to be directly involved in the day-to-day scrutiny of investment program and make investment decisions. That doesn't mean that the government is entirely passive in the investment of Hong Kong GP. In fact, there can be different modes of investment. The investment mode adopted by HKGP can rely on the wide market network of GPs to source projects with good potential and with a Hong Kong nexus. Besides, reputable and experienced GPs do not just raise capital for enterprises. They can also provide assistance to improve the operation of these enterprises and thereby enhance their competitiveness and productivity and promote their growth. The appointment of GP is like this. First, the GC formulate strategies, strategic direction, and investment mandate for Hong Kong GP, including but not limited to the interpretation and investment pace of Hong Kong nexus. And then, based on the direction set by the GC, the IC, with the professional support of Hong Kong MA, will consider the overall investment environment, government objectives in devising selection criteria. And then investment institutions can submit proposals, and then the Hong Kong MA will exercise due diligence check and make recommendations on appointment to IC. The IC, after listening to presentations from institutions, they can put direct issues of concern to the IC and assess whether they are fit to be appointed as GP of the HKGP. They do not just consider the competence and track record of these companies. The IC will pay particular attention to the contribution to Hong Kong from these enterprises and also their understanding of the relevant policies and implementation plan. This demonstrates that the government has ample room to steer the Hong Kong GP to ensure that investment can dovetail the overall objective of the government. And after appointment, the government will closely monitor the performance of GP. Apart from financial returns, ICs will also set out non-financial returns as reference for measuring the Hong Kong GP. And there will be regular communication with GPs and to provide basic guidance on asset placement to ensure that it is aligned with our macro strategy and industry development so that in the long term we can benefit our economy, our industry development, and even our livelihood. Through Hong Kong MA, we can monitor the performance of GPs after investment, and there can be regular meetings to understand GPs' performance and compliance, and also performance in the non-financial aspect to ensure that the investment in HKGP can promote and upgrade the transformation of industry structure and support long-term development of our economy. To get more investment opportunities, we welcome enterprises, including local startups, to submit investment proposals to investment institutions of HKGP. HKGP will further enhance the relevant channels to facilitate local enterprises to provide information on the company and development plans to the GPs so that we can consider them from a professional perspective and look at the investment value and decide whether we should invest in these enterprises to secure investment return and to promote industry development and boost our economy. Some members are concerned about the disclosure arrangement of HKGP because private equity fund in nature are long-term investment and it takes longer to realize the returns. And I think their performance should be assessed in the longer term. However, the HKGP's return is an important indicator for measuring the success or otherwise of the portfolio. So we do have the duty to make disclosures. The government has accepted the expert team's proposal. We should look at the long-term return of HKGP instead of its return after the first year after its establishment. We will disclose the returns of HKGP 5 years after its establishment, and then we'll consider making regular publication as well. Dr. Hung suggests that the government should be directly involved in making investment decisions. Now, we will consider setting up the strategic tech fund and consider different modes of operation. The INT, Undersecretary for INT, will explain to members what's involved in this aspect. And then the Undersecretary for Commerce and Economic Development will respond in areas of development in the commercial industry. The FSTB will continue to communicate with members on the HKGP so as to enhance your understanding, and we would like to put your wisdom together to further enhance the investment model. Thank you. My colleagues will then respond on the various aspects. Thank you.
Undersecretary for Innovation Technology, Mr. Deputy, I'm grateful to Dr. Hong Wen and 8 other members for moving the motion and the amendments. I'm also grateful to members who spoke in relation to the development of innovation technology in Hong Kong. They have provided valuable comments. Here, I would like to give a reply concerning issues related to our portfolio, like supporting the innovation technology startups, setting up the strategic technology fund, as well as the industrial policy of smart manufacturing. Innovation technology will be important for our future, and enterprises are important in the innovation technology chain. Members are concerned about our investment in the startups. In fact, under the Innovation Technology Fund, we have the Innovation Technology Venture Fund, and then the Science and Technology Park has got the Corporate Venture Fund, and the Cyberport has got the Cyberport Macro Fund. They are all there to help startups to attract private investment, and it is on a matching basis. They were set up in the past, and then up to March this year, the three of them have altogether invested $600 million in 70 startups and have attracted $7.3 billion of private capital. The two for the startups in the two science parks, the past 3 years, they've attracted over $60 billion worth of investment. Some members are concerned about our efforts to help the commercialization of the R&D outcomes of universities. In fact, the Technology Startup Support Scheme for universities have been doing this, and in fact, we have been creating economic value. The budget this year has doubled the amount of subsidy given to each university joining the scheme, up to $16 billion. The budget also announced the setting up of the Strategic Technology Fund worth $5 billion. This is indeed an important investment, so that while we promote our INT ecology, so that we can provide more quality job opportunities, we'll be focusing on the investment in strategic and startups in the INT realm, especially those with a lot of development potentials. This will enrich our ecology in terms of INT. We'll be inviting the Science and Technology Park as well as the Cyberport to identify the right opportunities for investment. Some members have also said that we should nurture actively the advanced manufacturing industry as well as the need to come up with a clear industrial policy. We should also set the priorities for our technological development. And in fact, the government has been doing so in relation to advanced manufacturing, and we have been helping the established industries to upgrade. We would like to have quality job opportunities for citizens and would like to diversify our economy. For the first advanced manufacturing center, it is set up in the Inno Park in Chung-hung, and we are inviting tenancies. As a result of the favorable response, the Hong Kong STP is considering a second advanced manufacturing center. Well, we know that the developments in technology would be advancing rapidly, and we know that different disciplines would complement each other. It is said that we should try to invest in areas where it is difficult to attract investment, but there would be a lot of potentials. In fact, we have an open mind. As long as a project meets our objectives, we will actively consider members' views. For the R&D of life and health sciences as well as microelectronics, these are the areas that we have an advantage and will be injecting more resources. At the Hong Kong Science Park, we have the Inno Hong Kong research clusters, and under that we have the Health at Inno Hong Kong. 14 R&D laboratories are available to focus on health tech. And in fact, we have cooperation between top-notch world universities, R&D organizations, and our local universities and R&D organizations carrying out R&D across different disciplines. $10 billion will be set aside, as promised in the budget, to provide for the long-term development of the life and health science research. And this includes the setting up of the InnoLife Health Tech Hub in the Hong Kong Shenzhen Innovation Technology Park. We'll also be supporting the development of microelectronics. The first microelectronics center will be commissioned end of next year in Innopark in Yueheng, and this will get dedicated facilities and some common support facilities. This will help us to drive the development of high-value industries. Some members have also talked about grabbing the opportunities afforded by the GBA. Under the 14th Five-Year Plan, for the first time, we are going to have the Shenzhen Hong Kong Innovation Technology Cooperation Zone. This comprises the Hong Kong Shenzhen IT Park as well as the Shenzhen INT Zone. This will become one of the 4 cooperation platforms for the GBA, and we'll be having the Academy and the Inno Express of the GB as well. We'll continue to listen to different stakeholders. We'll listen to the legislature, and we'll make good use of our advantages. So I spoke. Thank you.
Undersecretary for Innovation and Undersecretary for Commerce and Economic Development. Mr. Deputy, I'd like to thank Dr. Wendy Hong for moving her motion, as well as 8 members for moving amendments and 17 other members for speaking. The National 14th Five-Year Plan talked about consolidating Hong Kong's competitive edge in 4 traditional centers and its development as 4 emerging centers, and these establish the role of Hong Kong in the national developments. The government's policy bureaus and departments have been supporting the National 14th Five-Year Plan by providing appropriate help to relevant industries under their policy ambits, so that Hong Kong can grasp the enormous opportunities presented by the dual circulation strategy of our nation to integrate itself in the national developments. I will now offer a consolidated response on the industry support measures offered by the CDB. Trade has always been a strong industry for Hong Kong, given the national support to elevate Hong Kong's status as an international trade center. Hong Kong's edge lies in its role as a connection between our nation and the rest of the world, especially linking the trade and business dealings between the Bay Area and ASEAN nations. The current term government signed a total of 4 free trade agreements and 4 investment agreements, bringing the total number of FTAs and IAs to 8 and 22 respectively. We will seek early accession to the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, and we will continue to promote our competitive edge through the Overseas Economic and Trade Offices of the SAR. And the Dubai ETO commenced operation in October last year to reinforce economic and trade ties with the Middle East, and this would help expand our trade and economic networks. Some members talked about providing support on branding and upgrading Hong Kong's traditional industries. In fact, the current term government invested a total of $5 billion to the dedicated fund on branding, upgrading, and domestic sales, which was widely popular, and granted $2.24 billion worth of funding across 3,600 applications under the National 14th Five-Year Plan. The domestic market presents enormous opportunities for Hong Kong businesses. Starting from this year, the government allocated an extra funding of $135 million to the Hong Kong Trade Development Council in the support scheme for pursuing development in the mainland. Through training, exchanges, business visits, etc., Hong Kong businesses can develop the mainland market. For tourism, the government promulgated the development blueprint for Hong Kong's tourism industry in 2017, and the vision is to develop Hong Kong into a world-class tourist destination. This dovetails with the planning paper of the nation, which supports the development of Hong Kong as an international tourism hub and core demonstration area for multi-destination tourism. Based on the development blueprint, the SAR government actively invests in the long-term development of tourism and to enhance local tourism resources. The budget this year allocated $1.26 billion to encourage the sector to develop and promote more tourism itineraries and products with cultural, heritage, and green living elements, and would provide training funding for practitioners. The government will continue to provide active support to prepare for the return of tourists and revival of tourism. The National 14th Five-Year Plan supports Hong Kong in its development as a regional intellectual property trading hub. The government is now refining Hong Kong's IP protection regime. Apart from promoting the original grant patent system and preparing for the implementation of the Madrid Protocol in Hong Kong, The government restarted work in amending the copyright ordinance to reinforce IP protection in the digital environment. The relevant amendment bill just completed the first and second readings today. We will continue to look at facilitation measures for cross-boundary IP protection measures with the mainland authorities and to enhance the SME training programs. We will work with the Department of Justice in IP arbitration and mediation services, and we will continue to promote our edge in IP trading to mainland and overseas enterprises. We will also deepen collaboration with the mainland and Macau authorities on IP collaboration in the Bay Area and other areas. Under the 14th Five-Year Plan, Hong Kong is given support in transforming itself as an East meets West Center for International Cultural Exchange, and this would create favorable conditions for our creative industries. The current term government injected a total of $3 billion into the Create Smart Initiative and Film Development Fund to support 8 major creative industries, including advertising, architecture, design, digital entertainment, film, music, printing and publication, as well as television. The focus is to nurture talent and promote the growth of startups, expand the markets, and to create a creative spirit in the community. Create Hong Kong under the CDB is also taking the lead in fostering collaboration between the creative industries and to organize visits by delegations to the Bay Area and Belt and Road countries in order to present the work of our creative industries and create more opportunities. The government will continue to reinforce the edge of our traditional industries while tap into emerging industries. Thank you.
Now I call upon Mr. Michael Look to move an amendment. President, I move my amendment. I propose the question to you that Mr. Michael Look's amendment be passed. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by a majority of each of the 2 groups of members present. I declare the amendment passed. Members have been informed that as Mr. Look Chung-hung's amendment has been passed, Dr. Johnny Ng will not move his amendment. Dr. Kennedy Wong, as Mr. Michael Look's amendment has been passed, you may move your further amendment. President, I move my further amendment. I propose the question to you that Dr. Kennedy Wong's further amendments be passed. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by a majority of each of the 2 groups of members present. I declare the amendment passed. Mr. Frankie YICK, as the amendments of Mr. Michael Look and Dr. Kennedy Wong have been passed, you may move your further amendment. President, I move my further amendment. I propose the question to you that Mr. Frankie YICK's further amendments be passed. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by a majority of each of the 2 groups of members present. I declare the amendment passed. Dr. Kennedy Wong, as the amendments of Mr. Michael Look, Dr. Kennedy Wong, and Mr. Frankie YICK have been passed, you may move your further amendment. I move my further amendment. I propose the question to you that Dr. Stephen Wong's further amendments be passed. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by a majority of each of the 2 groups of members present. I declare the amendment passed. Mr. Paul Chair, as the amendments of Mr. Michael Look, Dr. Kennedy Wong, Mr. Frankie YICK, and Dr. Stephen Wong have been passed, you may move your further amendment. President, I move my further amendment. I propose a question to you that Mr. Paul Chair's further amendments be passed. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against please raise their hands. I declare the amendment passed. Dr. Tan Yueheng, as the amendments of Mr. Michael Look, Dr. Kennedy Wong, Mr. Frankie YICK, Dr. Stephen Wong, and Mr. Paul Jay have been passed, you may move your further amendment. President, I move my further amendment. I propose the question to you that Dr. Tan Yueheng's further amendments be passed? Will those in favour please raise their hands? Those against please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by a majority of each of the two groups of members present. I declare the amendment passed. Mr. Sunny Tan, as the amendments of Mr. Michael Look, Dr. Kennedy Wong, Mr. Frankie YICK, Dr. Stephen Wong, Mr. Paul Chair, and Dr. Tang Yueheng have been passed, you may move your further amendment. President, I move my further amendment. I propose the question to you that Mr. Sunny Tan's further amendments be passed. Will those in favour please raise their hands? Those against please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by a majority of each of the two groups of members present. I declare the amendment passed. Dr. Wendy Hong, you still have 46 seconds to reply, then the debate will come to a close. Dr. Wendy Hong.
President, the Future Fund has been set up for 6 years and the Hong Kong growth portfolio has been set up for 2 years. It's time to examine whether these funds are put into proper use and whether they can create a bright future for Hong Kong. Can the Hong Kong growth portfolio drive growth for Hong Kong? These two funds could be an opportunity for the government to change its role. Hong Kong is now at a crossroads along with the rest of the world. The government should be proactive in setting a new tone for Hong Kong and to identify new roles for Hong Kong in the context of our nation and the world. I now put the question to you that Dr. Wendy Hong's motion as amended by Mr. Chung-hung, Dr. Kennedy Wong, Mr. Frankie YICK, Dr. Johnny Ng, Dr. Stephen Wong, Mr. Paul Chair, and Dr. Tan Yueheng be passed. Will those in favour please raise their hands? Those against please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by a majority of each of the two groups of members present. I declare the motion as amended passed. I now adjourn the Council. The Council will resume on Wednesday, 15th of June 2022 at 11 a.m.